as a composer, conductor, and trailblazer in breaking down racial barriers in classical music. William Grant Still was a towering figure in American music history. It was Still who became the first American composer to have an opera produced by the New York City Opera, often referred to as the Dean of Afro-American Composers. His first symphony, Afro-American Symphony, was the most widely performed symphony composed by an American for many years. In the field of American classical music, he became a leading figure when he became the first African American to conduct a major symphony orchestra, conduct an opera on national television, and have a symphony performed by a leading orchestra. A child of the Reconstruction era of the United States, Still was born on the 11th of May, 1895, in Woodville, Mississippi. It goes without saying that Still's childhood was shaped by the rich cultural heritage of the Deep South. His parents were both educators. His mother, Carrie Lena Fambrough Still Shepperson, graduated from Clark Atlanta University in 1886 and taught at Alabama State Agricultural and Mechanical College before she married William Grant Still Sr. in 1894. Among his accomplishments were organizing a black marching band in the Woodville area at the age of 16 and starting the All-Corn A&M College Band shortly after its opening in 1872. Aside from his brief stint as a teacher at Alabama State College in Florence, Alabama, he also taught the father of the blues, W.C. Handy. Sr. was a partner in a grocery store and a local band leader by the time their one and only child was born. Although he would pass away when his son was just 3 months old, the accomplishments he achieved in just 24 short years would live on in his son. In addition, his mother ensured that he also had a passion for music, and his father's legacy would live through him. After moving to Little Rock, Arkansas, Carrie taught for 30 years at various schools there. Her library at Capitol Hill School was funded by a benefit program of performances by students. To support the city's black schools, she continued to stage annual shows in the area. Among her other accomplishments, Carrie directed school choirs and lectured at a county institute for black teachers in 1899. And she also served as secretary of the Little Rock NAACP branch. In 1904, she married a postal clerk named Charles B. Shepperson. As a musically inclined individual himself, Charles encouraged his stepson's musical interest by taking him to operettas and purchasing Red Seal records, which a young Still enjoyed very much. A number of concerts by musicians on tour were also attended by the two of them. He also had a maternal grandmother, Anne Fambrough, who sang African American spirituals. He recalls fondly of her. I spent much of time in childhood around my maternal grandmother. I have much to thank her for. She was one of the old-fashioned devout Christians. She had been a slave, although she was one of the fortunate ones who did not have to work in the fields. She had seen slaves being herded along the country roads of Georgia on the way to the slave mart. She knew and sang the old songs that voiced the slaves' belief that God would not forget them. Because of her influence, I have been enabled to realize the value of things spiritual and love them. In me, the fleshly tendencies are strong. Were it not for the training I received through contact with my grandmother, I could not restrain them. God was good to give me such a grandmother. Still started violin lessons at the age of 15. As he grew older, he taught himself to play many other instruments in the string family, as well as the oboe, the clarinet, and the saxophone. At age 16, He graduated as class valedictorian from M.W. Gibbs High School. From there, he entered Wilberforce University's pre-med program in Xenia, Ohio, at the insistence of his mother, who wanted him to eventually become a doctor. But that wasn't the path that felt right for him. Upon returning home after my first year at college, I begged my mother to send me to Oberlin, but she had mapped out a career for me. I was to finish Wilberforce and then go to Oxford. That did not interest me. I wanted to study music. And so, I wasted time in college just barely making my grades, always in trouble for playing pranks, spending most of my time studying music, attempting to write and playing the violin. As noted, Steele began composing and arranging in earnest. In addition to conducting the university band, he learned to play a variety of other musical instruments and started orchestrating. His formation of a musical ensemble became the model of the performing arts program that continues to this day. In his senior year, Steele would marry Grace Bundy in order to avoid a sex scandal based on a sighting of the two of them walking together in the woods. He would also drop out of Wilberforce. Finally, in my senior year, just about 6 weeks before I would have graduated, I got mixed up in another prank. This was of a more serious nature. To be exact, it appeared serious to others, although nothing was done by any concerned that it was at all wrong, i.e. morally. After this, I left college to make my own way. His mother was especially brokenhearted by this. Steele would go from Columbus, Ohio, and eventually down to Memphis, Tennessee, where W.C. Handy, an established musician himself, hired him as his primary arranger while he served as band leader for the Knights of Pythias. Around 1917, Steele received a small amount of money left to him by his father and began studying music at the Oberlin Conservatory of Music in Oberlin, Ohio. Steele worked for the school assisting the janitor, as well as a few other small jobs outside of the school, yet he struggled financially. In response to Professor Lehman's question about his lack of study of composition, Steele told him honestly that he couldn't afford to, which led George Whitefield Andrews to agree to teach him composition for free. He also studied privately with the modern French composer Edgard Varèse and the American composer George Whitefield Chadwick. In 1918, Steele joined the United States Navy to serve in World War I as a mess hall cook and violinist for officers' meals. He was discharged from duty when the Allied forces and German forces entered a ceasefire on the 11th of November. He eventually returned to Oberlin for a session, but did not receive a degree. Instead, in 1919, he moved to Harlem in New York City, where again he worked for W.C. Handy. In the midst of the Harlem Renaissance, around the likes of Langston Hughes, Alain Locke, Arna Bontemps, and Count Cullen, these diverse people and experiences provided Steele with professional contacts and valuable insight into performing, arranging, orchestrating, and composing popular and symphonic music. His compositions often drew inspiration from African American folk music, jazz, and spirituals, showcasing his commitment to representing the diverse cultural tapestry of America. He recorded with Fletcher Henderson's Dance Orchestra in 1921 and later played in the pit orchestra for Noble Sissy and U.B. Blake's musical Shuffle Along, and another pit with Sophie Tucker, Artie Shaw, and Paul Whiteman. Under Henderson, he joined Henry Pace's Pace Phonograph Company, known as Black Swan Records. Later in the 1920s, Still served as the arranger of Yamacraws, a Negro rhapsody composed by the Harlem stride pianist James P. Johnson. From the Black Belt, from the Land of Dreams, Darker America, from the Journal of a Wanderer, La Guia Blesse, and Levy Land are among the noteworthy works Still composed during his developmental period. Among Still's most well-known compositions is the Afro-American Symphony, composed in 1930, and first performed by the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra under Howard Hanson in 1931. This was the first African-American symphony to be performed by a major orchestra and is still performed to this day. Many of Still's compositions were later performed by Hanson as part of his American Composers concerts in Rochester and in Europe. Still met Paul Whiteman, who hired him as a music arranger. When Whiteman took his orchestra to Hollywood, California in May 1929, Still went as well. During the course of the year, Still completed more than 100 arrangements for Whiteman. Whiteman later commissioned Still to create original compositions, including A Deserted Plantation, Beyond Tomorrow, Land of Superstition, Ebon Chronicle, Down Yonder, and Blues from Lenox Avenue. Still moved permanently to Los Angeles in 1934, and he enjoyed considerable success in the 1930s and 1940s, with major orchestras increasingly performing his compositions. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra performed La Guia Blesse, a ballet composition, on the 16th of June in 1933. On the 20th of November 1935, the New York Philharmonic performed Still's Afro-American Symphony at Carnegie Hall. On the 10th of December 1937, Leopold Stokowski and the Philadelphia Symphony premiered his symphony in G minor. The success of Still came at a great cost. Even though he had fathered 4 children with his wife Grace, his home life was a distant second to his music. The Still family stayed in Kentucky during the initial years he spent becoming established before joining him in New York. His marriage, however, broke down due to the instability of a musician's life that included attending various gigs, as well as the financial strain that came with such a career that included feast and famine. And so, on the 6th of February in 1939, after nearly 25 years of marriage, William and Grace divorced. 2 days after that, he married Werner Arve. The two had to wed in Mexico, where interracial marriages were legal, as Arve was of Russian Jewish heritage. Despite this, the union didn't seem to damage their professional careers. Still continued going from strength to strength, and Arve's talents as an accomplished pianist and excellent writer served her husband well throughout their time together. Still wrote the theme music for the 1939-1940 New York World's Fair. Song of a City, once recorded, was played nearly 32,000 times at the fair, according to New Yorker magazine. The New York Philharmonic first performed and they lynched him on a tree on the 24th of June, 1940 in Louison Stadium. The New York Philharmonic also premiered Plain Chant for America on the 23rd of October, 1941, and The Colored Soldiers Who Died for Democracy on the 5th of January, 1944, both of which were at Carnegie Hall. The Cleveland Orchestra premiered Poem for Orchestra on the 7th of December, 1944, and the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra premiered Festive Overture on the 19th of January, 1945. The opera Troubled Island, with a libretto by poet Langston Hughes, premiered by the New York City Opera Company on the 31st of March, 1949. Steele's compositions include symphonies, ballets, operas, chamber music, and works for solo instruments. Together, they number almost 200 pieces. Steele's health began to decline in 1970. He spent his last years in a convalescent home and died in Los Angeles on the 3rd of December, 1978. His ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. Despite facing racial prejudice and limited opportunities, Steele's talent and perseverance propelled him to success, earning him recognition as a pioneering figure in classical music. He broke down racial barriers, paving the way for future generations of African American composers and musicians. William Grant Steele left behind a legacy of musical innovation and social change. His music continues to be celebrated for its beauty, depth, and enduring significance in American cultural history.